Overnight, Israeli naval units intercepted the large civilian convoy, the global Sumund flotilla, that set out to challenge Israel's maritime blockade of Gaza and deliver symbolic consignments of food and medicine. Organisers say more than 40 vessels with roughly 500 people were involved, including lawmakers and campaigners, and by early morning, reporters and officials converged on the same core facts. Several boats were boarded and diverted towards Israel for deportation and processing. And it's Greta Thunberg, the most high-profile passenger, has it seems she's been filmed on deck, surrounded by Israeli personnel. Israel's foreign ministry posted that she and others were safe and healthy and being taken to port for removal, been arrested. That clip, widely circulated, became the night's visual shorthand for the operation. But the flotilla's live tracker has around 3:20 a.m. local time. They had some 30 boats at sea, approximately 46 nautical miles from Gaza, even as communications from multiple vessels were lost. One track noted that a boat, Meccano, entered Gaza's territorial waters before feeds dropped. Whether any craft can remain there is doubtful given the pace of interceptions, but the activist message was plain: still sailing strong. Israel's line has been equally clear. There is an approach to an active combat zone which they are entering. Enforcement of a declared naval blockade remains lawful, and any aid can be transferred through approved corridors. Naval radio warnings were issued. Boats were stopped roughly at 70 to 75 nautical miles off Gaza, and passengers are being deported. International reaction has been immediate. Turkey described the action as an act of terror and began steps to secure the release of its nationals. Colombia announced the expulsion of Israel's diplomatic delegation following the detention of 2 Colombians. Ireland, Spain, Malaysia, Brazil, and others voiced concern or condemnation of Israel. In Italy, spontaneous protests erupted in major cities, and large unions called a general strike in solidarity. These responses, however, whatever one's view of the flotilla, show how a maritime standoff can quickly escalate into a diplomatic and street-level flashpoint. This is not happening in a vacuum. The night also brought further reports of heavy Israeli strikes inside Gaza, with dozens killed, and a renewed warning from Israel for civilians to leave Gaza City. If you remain in Gaza City, Israel will regard you as a member of Hamas, an active member of Hamas, and therefore a valid target. That parallel context underscores why the flotilla drew such traction. Supporters frame it as civil resistance to famine and siege. Critics as a theatrical provocation that risks lives and undercuts de-escalation. Now for the legal hinge, because that is where informed debate should sit. Modern naval blockade practice is largely assessed against the San Remo Manual, a codification of customary law that, among other things, permits blockades in armed conflict if they are declared effective and not aimed at starving civilians. Israel argues its blockade meets those tests and can therefore be enforced beyond territorial waters against vessels reasonably believed to be breaching it. The Palmer panel, convened by the UN Secretary General after the 2010 Mavi Marmara incident, endorsed the basic legality of Israel's blockade while criticizing aspects of force used in that case. Rights groups and several UN experts counter that Gaza's closure amounts to collective punishment, hence any enforcement action is unlawful, and that is why you will see credible sources citing the same law and reaching opposite conclusions. What is different tonight is the scale and the optics. The convoy is dispersed across dozens of small craft with persistent live streams that, before jamming, showed water cannon, circling naval hulls, and crews seated with hands visible. The images rapidly seeded protests from Athens to Buenos Aires and Italian stations saw platforms blocked. The narrative battle has therefore moved beyond was a single ship lawfully stopped to is an entire civilian armada asserting a rite of passage that states will tolerate. There are 3 points for that need clarity rather than slogans. Even if a blockade can be enforced at sea under the San Remo principles, legitimacy erodes if civilians are starving. That is precisely why activists emphasize famine data and why Israel stresses alternative aid routes. The legal debate is inseparable from humanitarian performance on the ground. The more nationalities on board, lawmakers, union leaders, public figures, the higher the political cost of mishandling. Colombia's expulsion of Israeli diplomats is a case in point. Expect more consular pressure, not less. And mislabeled clips already circulate. Serious outlets have been verifying footage and correcting fakes, including viral videos that were actually Turkish football flotillas. In a crisis driven by imagery, verification is a civic duty. So where does this go today? If Israel completes mass tows to Ashdod and accelerates deportations, the maritime picture will quieten, but the politics will not. Italy's strikes and wider protests will run. Governments will lodge démarches, and the next convoy will already be planning. If even one boat lands supplies on a Gazan beach, however briefly, it will be a symbolic defeat for blockade enforcement and a catalytic moment for copycats. According to the Turkish coverage, that has now happened. Either way, though, the flotilla has succeeded in reframing Gaza for the news cycle, not as airstrikes and negotiations alone, but as a test of who controls the sea lanes and the story of hunger. A last word on method. People who vividly remember the 2010 interception and the people for whom Greta is the hook, the timeline needs to be crisp, the law needs to be accurate, the tone humane. Two ideas here. First, that approaching an active combat zone and violating a lawful blockade, that would be the Israeli position when aid can go through safe channels, and indeed it was already offered. That's the Israeli position. The organisers' position is that peaceful civilian ships in international waters should not be engaged. Interception is illegal piracy intended to sustain a siege. And asking this question, cutting through the noise, if the seas are closed, what timely, credible route for large-scale relief actually remains, and who guarantees it works tomorrow, not next month? And that probably is the big question. As for Greta Thunberg's activity in this, she is a beacon of interest for the media. But I worry that this is a lot of effort with no aid actually getting through, and people will say, well, that's the intention. The intention is to draw attention to the plight. Well, we know what the attention is, and I worry that this is a misplaced interest. But of course it is interesting. That is the irony.